Welcome back to the Historian's Tome, where history becomes your companion through the night. Tonight, we journey back over 2,000 years to ancient India to discover the rise and fall of the Mauryan Empire, the first great empire to unite the Indian subcontinent. Before we begin, if you enjoy these calming historical journeys, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel.
I'm curious, where are you watching from tonight?
What time is it where you are? Perhaps you're settling in after a long day, or maybe it's the quiet hours of the morning. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, let yourself relax. Get comfortable, close your eyes if you wish, and let the story of the Mauryan Empire carry you gently into sleep. In the 4th century before the Common Era, the land we now call India was a tapestry of kingdoms, republics, and tribal territories. There was no single ruler, no unified nation. Instead, dozens of small states competed for power, formed alliances, and fought wars that reshaped borders season after season. The most powerful kingdoms were known as the Mahajanapadas, which means great realms. 16 major kingdoms dominated the northern plains and eastern regions. Among these, 4 stood above the rest in wealth and military strength. There was Magadha in the east, Kosala in the north, Avanti in the west, and Vatsa in the central regions. Magadha would become the most important of all these kingdoms. Its capital city, Pataliputra, sat at the meeting point of several major rivers. This gave Magadha control over vital trade routes and fertile farming lands. The kingdom grew wealthy from trade, and its wealth allowed it to maintain large armies. During this time, 2 new religions were spreading across northern India. Buddhism and Jainism both emerged around the 6th century before the Common Era. These faiths challenged the old Vedic traditions and the power of the Brahmin priests. They spoke of personal enlightenment, of ending suffering through right action and thought. These ideas would later play a crucial role in the Mauryan story. Life in these ancient kingdoms followed the rhythms of agriculture. Most people were farmers who worked small plots of land. They grew rice, wheat, barley, and various pulses. The monsoon rains determined whether families would feast or starve. When the rains came on time, the harvests were abundant. When they failed, famine followed. Villages were small, tight communities where everyone knew their neighbors. Houses were built from wood, mud bricks, and thatch. Families lived simply with few possessions. Clay pots for cooking and storage, simple tools for farming, rough cotton clothes. These were the belongings of common people. The cities told a different story. In places like Taxila in the northwest and Pataliputra in the east, merchants grew rich from trade. Goods flowed along ancient routes that connected India to Persia, Central Asia, and beyond. Indian cotton, spices, and precious stones traveled west. Gold, silver, and horses came from the other direction. In these cities, craftsmen worked in specialized quarters. There were entire streets devoted to metal workers who hammered bronze and iron into tools and weapons. Other areas housed potters, weavers, jewelers, and ivory carvers. The sound of their work filled the air from dawn to dusk. The political landscape was constantly shifting. Kingdoms rose through military conquest, clever alliances, or strategic marriages. A strong king could expand his realm dramatically in a single lifetime. But when he died, his kingdom might fragment among squabbling sons and ambitious nobles. The Nanda dynasty ruled Magadha in the 4th century before the Common Era. They were known for their enormous wealth and their powerful army. Ancient texts speak of the Nandas maintaining an army of 200,000 infantry, 20,000 cavalry, and thousands of war elephants. Whether these numbers are exact or exaggerated, they tell us the Nandas were a force to be reckoned with. But the Nanda kings were not loved by their people. They were seen as low-born rulers who had seized power through cunning rather than noble lineage. They taxed their subjects heavily to maintain their vast armies and fill their treasuries. Resentment simmered throughout their kingdom. Into this world of competing kingdoms and social change, a boy named Chandragupta was born. The exact details of his birth remain clouded in legend and contradictory accounts. Some sources say he was born into a humble family, possibly even the son of a peacock keeper. Other accounts claim he had noble blood but was raised in poverty after his father's death. What we know for certain is that Chandragupta's life would change the course of Indian history. But first, events far to the west would shake the foundations of the known world and create the opportunity for a new kind of empire to emerge in India. While the kingdoms of India competed among themselves, a storm was brewing in the west. Alexander of Macedon, known to history as Alexander the Great, had conquered the mighty Persian Empire. His armies swept through what is now Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Iraq, and Iran. By 327 before the Common Era, Alexander reached the edges of the Indian subcontinent. Alexander crossed the Indus River and entered the Punjab region. He fought several battles with local rulers, the most famous being against King Porus. Despite winning these battles, Alexander's troops were exhausted. They had been marching and fighting for years, traveling thousands of miles from their homeland. When they heard rumors of vast armies waiting in the east, they refused to go further. Alexander turned back, but his invasion changed everything. The old Persian-controlled territories in the northwest were suddenly up for grabs. Local rulers had been defeated or displaced. Power vacuums appeared across the region. This chaos created opportunity for anyone bold enough to seize it. This is where our main character truly enters the story. Chandragupta Maurya, a young man of ambition and capability, recognized the moment for what it was. According to tradition, he was guided by a brilliant teacher and strategist named Chanakya, also known as Kautilya or Vishnugupta. Chanakya's own story is remarkable. He was a Brahmin scholar and teacher at the ancient University of Taxila.
Legend says he was insulted by the Nanda king of Magadha.
In revenge, Chanakya vowed to destroy the Nanda dynasty and place a new king on the throne. Whether this story is true or embellished, Chanakya became the architect of the Mauryan Empire. The partnership between Chandragupta and Chanakya combined military prowess with political genius. Chanakya saw in the young Chandragupta the qualities of a great ruler: courage, intelligence, and determination. Together they began to build an army and lay plans for conquest. Their first target was not Magadha but the northwestern territories. Chandragupta gathered forces from various sources. Some soldiers were mercenaries attracted by promises of wealth. Others were adventurers seeking glory. Still others were displaced warriors from the kingdoms Alexander had disrupted. Chandragupta's campaign in the northwest was methodical and effective. He did not simply conquer by force. He formed alliances with local chiefs, offered protection to merchants, and presented himself as a unifier rather than a foreign conqueror. City by city, region by region, he brought the northwest under his control. By around 321 before the Common Era, Chandragupta controlled a substantial territory stretching from the Indus River to the edges of Magadha. Now he was ready to challenge the Nanda dynasty itself. The Nandas still commanded their massive army, but they had grown complacent and unpopular. Chanakya's strategy for conquering Magadha was brilliant in its subtlety. Rather than face the Nanda army in open battle, which would have been disastrous, they worked to undermine Nanda authority from within. They spread rumors about the king's incompetence and cruelty. They won over key officials and military commanders with promises and gold. At the same time, Chandragupta's forces began taking control of the countryside surrounding Pataliputra. They cut off supply lines and isolated the capital city. The Nanda king found himself trapped in his own palace, his authority evaporating like morning mist. The final confrontation came not through epic battle, but through calculated pressure. The Nanda king, seeing his position was hopeless, chose exile over death. Chandragupta Maurya entered Pataliputra and claimed the throne of Magadha. The Mauryan Empire was born, but Chandragupta's ambitions extended far beyond Magadha. Over the next several years, he expanded his empire in all directions. To the south, he pushed into the Deccan Plateau. To the east, he reached the borders of Bengal. To the north, he controlled the Himalayan foothills. And to the west, he came into conflict with the successors of Alexander the Great. One of Alexander's generals, Seleucus Nicator, had claimed much of the former Persian Empire, including territories that bordered Chandragupta's realm. Around 305 before the Common Era, Seleucus marched east to reassert control over the Indian borderland. Chandragupta met this challenge head-on. The war between Chandragupta and Seleucus is poorly documented, but its outcome is clear. Chandragupta emerged victorious.
Rather than continuing a costly war, the two rulers negotiated a peace treaty.
Seleucus ceded substantial territories to Chandragupta, including what is now Afghanistan and parts of Pakistan. In return, Chandragupta gave Seleucus 500 war elephants, which would later prove crucial in Seleucus's wars with other successors of Alexander. The treaty also included a marriage alliance, likely with Chandragupta taking a Greek princess as wife. Perhaps most importantly, Seleucus sent an ambassador named Megasthenes to the Mauryan court. Megasthenes lived in Pataliputra for several years and wrote a detailed account of what he saw. Though his original work is lost, fragments survived in the writings of later Greek and Roman authors. These fragments provide valuable glimpses into the Mauryan Empire at its height. By 300 before the Common Era, Chandragupta ruled an empire that stretched from Bengal to Afghanistan, from the Himalayas to central India. It was the largest empire ever seen in the subcontinent. More impressively, it was relatively stable and well-governed. This was not simply military conquest, but political consolidation. Creating an empire is one thing.
Governing it effectively is quite another.
The Mauryan Empire succeeded not just through military might, but through sophisticated administration. Much of this system was designed by Chanakya, whose treatise on governance, the Arthashastra, provides remarkable insight into how the empire functioned. The empire was divided into provinces, each governed by a royal prince or trusted official. These provinces were further divided into districts and villages. At each level, officials collected taxes, maintained order, and reported to the level above them. This created a hierarchical system that allowed the central government to maintain control over vast distances. Communication was vital for holding the empire together. The Mauryans built and maintained an extensive road network. The most famous was the royal road that ran from Pataliputra in the east to Taxila in the northwest, covering over 1,500 miles. Along these roads, rest houses provided shelter for travelers, guard posts ensured security, wells offered fresh water. The roads served multiple purposes. They allowed the army to move quickly to trouble spots. They facilitated trade, which enriched the empire. They enabled government officials to travel between regions, and they allowed information to flow to and from the capital. A message could travel the length of the empire in a matter of weeks, remarkable for the ancient world. The Mauryan government maintained detailed records. Bureaucrats tracked tax revenues, military supplies, population numbers, and crop yields. This information allowed the central government to make informed decisions about where to send resources, which regions needed relief during famines, and how many soldiers could be supported by each province. Taxation was the lifeblood of the empire. Farmers paid a portion of their harvest, typically between 1/6 and 1/4 of their production. Merchants paid taxes on goods transported along the roads. Artisans paid license fees to practice their crafts in cities. Even forest tribes paid tribute in the form of honey, timber, and elephant tusks. The tax burden was significant, but the Mauryan government provided services in return. It maintained irrigation systems that helped farmers increase their yields. It protected trade routes from bandits. It enforced laws that provided some measure of justice. It built public works like roads, wells, and reservoirs. The capital city of Pataliputra was a marvel of ancient urban planning. Greek accounts describe it as a vast city surrounded by massive wooden walls with 570 towers and 64 gates. The city stretched along the banks of the Ganges River for 9 miles. Its population may have reached several 100,000, making it one of the largest cities in the world at that time. Within Pataliputra, the royal palace stood as the most impressive structure. Megasthenes described it as exceeding the palaces of Persia in grandeur. Archaeological evidence suggests it was built primarily of wood, with elaborately carved pillars and ornate decorations. Gardens surrounded the palace, filled with exotic plants and animals. The Mauryan army was the muscle that backed up imperial authority. It was divided into 4 main branches: infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants. The infantry formed the bulk of the army, equipped with bows, swords, spears, and shields. The cavalry provided mobility and shock power. Chariots, though becoming less effective on Indian battlefields, still held ceremonial importance. War elephants were the ancient equivalent of tanks, capable of breaking enemy formations and spreading terror. Maintaining this vast military machine required enormous resources. Soldiers needed to be fed, clothed, and paid. Weapons had to be manufactured and replaced. Horses and elephants required constant care and training. The Arthashastra devotes extensive sections to military logistics, revealing the sophisticated planning involved. Justice in the Mauryan Empire followed established codes of law. Courts operated at various levels, from village councils to royal judges. Punishments for crimes ranged from fines to mutilation to execution, depending on the severity of the offense and the social status of the perpetrator. The system was harsh by modern standards, but it reflected the values and practical needs of ancient society. Trade flourished under Mauryan rule. With political stability and good roads, merchants could transport goods safely across the empire and beyond. Indian exports included cotton textiles, which were famous throughout the ancient world for their quality. Spices like black pepper and cinnamon commanded high prices in Western markets. Precious stones, especially diamonds from south-central India, adorned the wealthy from Rome to China. Imports flowed into India as well. Horses came from Central Asia and Persia, crucial for the cavalry. Gold and silver arrived from Western lands. Chinese silk made its way along early versions of the Silk Road. This international trade enriched the empire and connected it to a wider world. The economy was not just agricultural and commercial. Skilled artisans produced goods that sustained both daily life and luxury trade. Metal workers crafted everything from farming tools to intricate jewelry. Weavers produced cotton cloth of various qualities. Stone carvers created sculptures for temples and palaces. The empire's prosperity rested on the labor of these craftspeople as much as on farmers and soldiers. Chanakya's Arthashastra reveals a philosophy of governance that was remarkably pragmatic. It advised the king to be shrewd, to use spies extensively to maintain a full treasury, to keep the army strong, and to balance harsh punishment with strategic mercy. It was a manual for power, designed to help a ruler maintain control over a diverse and potentially fractious empire. This system worked well during Chandragupta's reign, but maintaining such a vast empire required constant vigilance and strong leadership. What would happen when leadership changed? That question would be answered as Chandragupta's reign came to an end. After ruling for approximately 24 years, Chandragupta Maurya abdicated the throne in an act that has fascinated historians ever since. According to Jain tradition, a terrible famine struck the empire. Chandragupta, feeling responsible for the suffering of his people, chose to renounce worldly life. He became a Jain monk and traveled south to Karnataka, where he spent his final years in meditation and fasting. He died through the Jain practice of salakana, gradually reducing his food intake until death came peacefully. Whether this story is entirely accurate or embellished by later tradition, it tells us something important about Indian concepts of kingship and spirituality. Even the most powerful ruler was expected to consider spiritual matters and the welfare of his subjects above personal glory. Chandragupta's son, Bindusara, ascended the throne around 297 before the Common Era. While Bindusara never achieved the legendary status of his father or his famous son, he was a capable ruler who consolidated and expanded the empire his father had built. The Greeks called Bindusara Amitrachats, which possibly derives from a Sanskrit title meaning slayer of
enemies, as this nickname was well earned.
Bindusara conducted military campaigns that expanded Mauryan control deep into southern India. Under his rule, the empire grew to encompass nearly the entire subcontinent, with the exception of the far southern tip and the kingdom of Kalinga on the eastern coast. Bindusara maintained diplomatic relations with the Hellenistic kingdoms to the west. Greek ambassadors continued to reside at the Mauryan court. One ambassador, Demachus, served during Bindusara's reign. These diplomatic connections facilitated trade and cultural exchange. Indian goods flowed west, while Greek philosophy and scientific knowledge traveled east. Stories suggest that Bindusara appreciated Greek culture. One account tells of him writing to the Seleucid king requesting Greek wine, dried figs, and a sophist, a Greek philosopher teacher. The Seleucid king sent the wine and figs, but politely replied that Greek law prohibited the export of sophists. Whether true or not, this story illustrates the cultural connections between the Mauryan Empire and the Hellenistic world. Under Bindusara's rule, the administrative system established by Chandragupta and Chanakya continued to function effectively. The provinces were well governed, taxes flowed to the capital, and the roads remained safe for merchants and travelers. The empire's prosperity continued to grow. Bindusara appears to have followed his father's religious tolerance. The Mauryan court welcomed Brahmins, Buddhists, Jains, and followers of other traditions. This pluralistic approach helped maintain peace in an empire with tremendous religious and cultural diversity. It also ensured that no single religious group could threaten royal authority by claiming divine sanction. However, religious tolerance does not mean all religions were treated equally. The Brahmins, as the traditional priestly class, maintained significant social influence. They performed rituals for the royal family and advised on matters they claimed required religious expertise. Buddhist and Jain monks gained respect through their asceticism and teachings, but they lacked the institutional power of the Brahmins. Life in the provinces varied considerably. In the heartland around Pataliputra, the emperor's presence was strongly felt. Officials enforced laws strictly, taxes were collected efficiently, and rebellion was unthinkable. But in more distant regions, especially along the frontiers, local customs remained dominant. As long as tribute flowed to the capital and nominal allegiance was maintained, the central government did not interfere too much in local affairs. The cities continued to grow during Bindusara's reign. Taxila in the northwest remained a major center of learning and trade. Ujjain in western India emerged as an important commercial hub. Tamralipti on the eastern coast served as the main port for maritime trade with Southeast Asia. These urban centers were cosmopolitan, places where people from different regions and cultures mixed and exchanged ideas. Village life, meanwhile, remained largely unchanged. The vast majority of the empire's population lived in small agricultural settlements. They worked the land as their ancestors had for generations. The empire's grandeur, the great cities, the philosophical debates, all of this was distant and abstract to the average farmer. What mattered was the monsoon, the harvest, and the tax collectors' demands. Bindusara ruled for approximately 25 years, maintaining the empire his father had created and expanding it further south. As his reign progressed, the question of succession became increasingly important. Bindusara had multiple sons, and different sources give different accounts of the succession process. What is clear is that it was not entirely smooth. The prince who would eventually succeed Bindusara was named Ashoka. He served as a provincial governor during his father's lifetime, first in Taxila and later in Ujjain. This experience governing large territories would prove valuable when he eventually became emperor. But the path to the throne would not be easy, and what Ashoka did after becoming emperor would transform not just the Mauryan Empire, but the entire history of Indian civilization. Ashoka's rise to power was marked by conflict and uncertainty. When Bindusara died around 272 before the Common Era, a succession struggle erupted among his sons. Later, Buddhist texts claim that Ashoka had to fight and kill several of his brothers to secure the throne. While these accounts were likely exaggerated by writers who wanted to emphasize Ashoka's later transformation, they suggest the succession was violent. Ashoka finally secured the throne, but his formal coronation may not have occurred until several years later. The early years of his reign showed a ruler very much in the mold of his father and grandfather. He was a strong military leader, an effective administrator, and a fierce defender of imperial authority. For the first 8 years of his reign, Ashoka gave no sign of being different from any other ambitious Indian king. Then came Kalinga. The kingdom of Kalinga occupied the eastern coastal region, roughly corresponding to modern Odisha. It was wealthy, well-defended, and proudly independent. It was also the last major kingdom in the Indian subcontinent that remained outside Mauryan control. For Ashoka, conquering Kalinga was both a strategic necessity and a matter of imperial prestige. In the 9th year of his reign, around 261 before the Common Era, Ashoka launched a massive invasion of Kalinga. The Mauryan army, one of the largest in the ancient world, descended on the kingdom in overwhelming force. The Kalingan forces fought bravely to defend their homeland, but they were vastly outnumbered and outmatched. The war was brutal. Ancient accounts speak of terrible slaughter as the Mauryan army crushed Kalingan resistance. Cities were besieged and stormed. The countryside was ravaged. Thousands of soldiers died in battle, but the military casualties were only part of the story. As was typical in ancient warfare, the civilian population suffered terribly. People were killed in the fighting, died from disease and starvation, or were forcibly relocated. After the war ended with complete Mauryan victory, Ashoka visited the conquered territory. What he saw there changed him forever. The sight of the devastation, the fields of dead, the suffering of the survivors, all of this struck Ashoka with tremendous force. For perhaps the first time, he truly comprehended the human cost of his ambition and power. The impact on Ashoka was profound and genuine. In a series of inscriptions carved on rocks and pillars throughout his empire, Ashoka publicly expressed his remorse for the Kalinga War. These inscriptions, written in various languages and scripts to reach different populations, are among the most remarkable documents from the ancient world. In his Rock Edict 13, Ashoka described the conquest of Kalinga and his response to it. He wrote that 150,000 people were deported, 100,000 were killed in battle, and many times that number perished from other causes. He expressed deep sorrow for this suffering and declared that he now considered all people as his children. He vowed to pursue conquest through righteousness rather than through violence. This was extraordinary. Powerful rulers in the ancient world did not typically express public remorse for military victories. They celebrated conquests, built monuments to their glory, and boasted of enemies slain. But Ashoka took the opposite approach. He used his power not to glorify warfare, but to acknowledge its horror and commit to a different path. Ashoka embraced Buddhism, though he never ceased to be the emperor. He did not renounce his throne as his grandfather had done. Instead, he sought to transform what it meant to be a ruler. He adopted the Buddhist concept of dharma, a term with multiple meanings but generally referring to righteousness, moral duty, and cosmic order. Ashoka's dharma emphasized non-violence, truthfulness, compassion, and tolerance. The emperor set about promoting his vision of dharma throughout the empire. He appointed special officials called dharma ministers, whose job was to work for the welfare of all people, regardless of their religion or social status. These ministers supervised charitable works, mediated disputes, and ensured that local officials treated subjects fairly. They also carried the emperor's message to remote parts of the empire. Ashoka sponsored the construction of hospitals for both humans and animals. He had wells dug and trees planted along roads to provide shade and refreshment for travelers. He established botanical gardens where medicinal herbs were cultivated. He banned certain cruel hunting practices and protected several species of animals. He reduced the amount of meat consumed in the royal household to set an example. The emperor also sent missionaries to spread Buddhism beyond India's borders. Buddhist traditions credit Ashoka with sending his own son and daughter as missionaries to Sri Lanka. Other missions went to Central Asia, Southeast Asia, and possibly as far as the Mediterranean world. While the extent of these missions may be exaggerated in Buddhist sources, there is no doubt that Buddhism began its transformation from an Indian religion to a world religion during Ashoka's reign. Despite his embrace of Buddhism and non-violence, Ashoka remained an effective ruler of a vast empire. He did not disband his army or abandon all use of force. He warned forest tribes that he would not hesitate to punish them if they threatened settled populations. He maintained the administrative machinery and the spy network. He understood that Dharma alone could not hold an empire together without the backing of organized power. Ashoka's rock and pillar edicts are scattered across the Indian subcontinent, from Afghanistan to Bangladesh, from Nepal to Karnataka. They are written in Prakrit languages using the Brahmi and Kharosthi scripts, as well as in Greek and Aramaic in the northwestern regions. These inscriptions served multiple purposes. They announced government policies, promoted moral values, recorded gifts to religious institutions, and reminded people of the emperor's commitment to Dharma. The pillars themselves were impressive monuments. Made from single pieces of sandstone, they stood up to 50 feet tall and weighed many tons. They were quarried at Chunar in modern Uttar Pradesh and transported hundreds of miles to their destinations. The capitals that topped these pillars were carved with animals like lions, bulls, and horses. The most famous is the lion capital from Sarnath, which became the national emblem of modern India. These monuments were not just political statements. They were also demonstrations of imperial power. The ability to quarry enormous stones, transport them vast distances, erect them, and carve them with inscriptions showed the empire's technical capability and organizational strength. They reminded people that the emperor, who spoke of compassion, also commanded enormous resources. Ashoka's reign lasted for approximately 37 years. For most of that time, the empire remained stable and prosperous. There were no major external threats and no significant internal rebellions. The administrative system continued to function effectively. Trade flourished. Cities grew. Buddhist monasteries multiplied across the landscape, supported by royal patronage and popular donations. The great Mauryan Emperor, Ashoka, died around 232 before the Common Era. With his death, the slow decline of the empire began. The reasons for this decline were complex and interconnected, reflecting common patterns in the rise and fall of large empires throughout history. The immediate problem was succession. Ashoka's sons and grandsons lacked his ability and vision. They fought among themselves for power. The empire began to fragment as different branches of the royal family established semi-independent kingdoms in various provinces. The strong centralized control that had held the empire together gradually weakened. Economic problems compounded political divisions. Maintaining the vast administrative apparatus, the large army, and the generous religious donations required enormous resources. Over time, the tax burden apparently became oppressive. There is evidence that agriculture and trade declined in the later Mauryan period, reducing government revenues. This created a vicious cycle as reduced revenues meant less spending on roads and irrigation, which further reduced economic productivity. The later Mauryan emperors also faced military challenges. In the northwest, Greco-Bactrian kingdoms began pushing into former Mauryan territories. These kingdoms, founded by Greek colonists who had settled in Central Asia after Alexander's conquests, combined Greek military techniques with local resources. They gradually took control of the Indus Valley and parts of Afghanistan. In the Deccan Plateau of central India, regional powers reasserted their independence. The later Mauryan emperors lacked the military strength to force these regions back under imperial control. What had been provinces of the empire became independent kingdoms, though they often maintained nominal allegiance to Pataliputra. There may also have been a reaction against Ashoka's promotion of Buddhism. While Ashoka had been tolerant of all religions, his clear preference for Buddhism may have alienated the powerful Brahmin community. Later inscriptions show some Mauryan rulers emphasizing their support for Vedic traditions, possibly trying to win back Brahmin support. This religious tension may have weakened the ideological foundations of the empire. The final Mauryan emperor, Brihadratha, was assassinated around 185 before the Common Era by one of his generals, Pushyamitra Shunga. Pushyamitra founded a new dynasty, the Shunga dynasty, which controlled a much smaller territory centered on the Ganges Valley. The great Mauryan Empire, which had united the subcontinent for the first time in history, came to an end after approximately 140 years, but the end of the political empire did not erase the Mauryan legacy. In many ways, the empire's influence only grew stronger after its collapse. Ashoka's inscriptions remain scattered across the landscape, permanent reminders of a time when a single ruler had governed from the Hindu Kush to Bengal. The roads built by the Mauryans continued to facilitate trade and communication long after the empire fell. Buddhism, which Ashoka had promoted so vigorously, continued to spread across Asia. Within a few centuries, it became one of the world's major religions, dominating not only India but also Central Asia, China, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asia. Much of this expansion built on the foundations laid during Ashoka's reign. The emperor, who had embraced non-violence after witnessing the horrors of war, became one of Buddhism's most important patrons. The administrative systems and political ideas of the Mauryan Empire influenced later Indian states. Subsequent empires, particularly the Gupta Empire several centuries later, consciously modeled themselves on Mauryan precedents. The ideal of a righteous emperor who rules for the welfare of all his subjects, which Ashoka embodied, became a standard by which Indian rulers were judged. The Arthashastra, the manual of statecraft associated with Chanakya, survived and influenced Indian political thought for centuries. Its realistic, practical approach to governance provided a template for rulers trying to build and maintain kingdoms. Even today, scholars study the Arthashastra for insights into ancient Indian politics and administration. Archaeological remains continue to reveal the material culture of the Mauryan period. The distinctive polished northern black polished ware pottery, the massive fortifications at Pataliputra, the rock-cut caves sponsored by Ashoka, all these provide tangible evidence of Mauryan civilization. Each new excavation adds to our understanding of how people lived, worked, and worshipped during this formative period. In modern times, the Mauryan Empire, and especially Ashoka, have taken on new significance. As India gained independence from British rule in the 20th century, leaders looked to their own history for symbols and inspiration. Ashoka's lion capital became India's national emblem. His chakra, the wheel that represents Dharma, was placed at the center of India's flag. The emperor, who had promoted non-violence and tolerance, became a symbol for a new nation seeking its identity. This modern appropriation of Ashoka and the Mauryan Empire is itself an interesting historical process. It shows how the past is constantly reinterpreted to serve present needs. The real Ashoka was a complex figure who combined genuine spiritual transformation with practical political power. The Mauryan Empire had both remarkable achievements and significant flaws. But for modern India, these historical realities matter less than the inspiring story of the subcontinent's first great empire. As you drift off to sleep, imagine walking through the streets of ancient Pataliputra at the height of Mauryan power. Picture the massive wooden walls, the busy markets filled with merchants from distant lands, the palace gardens where exotic animals wandered freely. See the roads stretching in all directions, connecting cities and villages across a vast empire. Notice the stone pillars rising toward the sky, carved with messages of dharma and compassion. The Mauryan Empire lasted for barely a century and a half, yet it left a mark on history that endures more than 2,000 years later. It showed that the Indian subcontinent could be united under a single government. It demonstrated that Buddhism could become more than a local teaching, transforming into a religion with universal appeal. It proved that an emperor could combine military power with moral vision, conquest with compassion. From Chandragupta's humble beginnings and audacious rise to power, through Bindusara's steady expansion to Ashoka's dramatic transformation after the horrors of war, the story of the Mauryan Empire reveals both the possibilities and limitations of human ambition. It reminds us that empires rise and fall, but ideas and values can transcend the political structures that gave them birth. Sleep well, knowing that history continues its endless flow, that the great deeds and terrible tragedies of the past have shaped the world we inhabit today. Let the story of ancient India's first great empire carry you gently into rest, as the centuries fade like footprints in sand, and the eternal human search for meaning and order continues through the endless night.